Whether your business is small, medium, large or extra large, there's a retirement solution for every type of business. oldmutualsuperfund.co.za.
Joining me now in this post-budget analysis discussion, I have with me Tuto Shumang. He's Deputy Director General, Asset and Liability Management. We're joined also by Matthew Simmons, Deputy Director General of the Budget Office, and Ishmael Mamiat. He is the Deputy Director General, Tax and Financial Sector Policy. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Let's start with the fact, Ismail, that overall borrowing is set to increase. Now, what balance are we going to be seeing between local and foreign debt?
I think that's a question Tuto should answer.
Well, there we go. That's a hospital pass. Tuto, that's up to you.
Well, we will maintain the strategy that we have adopted over the last couple of years, mainly borrow in the domestic market and also borrow an equivalent of $1.5 billion each year over the next 3 years in the international capital market to meet our foreign currency commitment.
And that, of course, looking at 40% in terms of our percentage of GDP, net debt will be seen peaking at 40%?
Yes, we according to the estimate that we have over the next 3 years, we just peak marginally above 40%, and we think this is a sustainable level.
Especially in light of the global context at the moment. Yes. Gentlemen, in terms of managing now our overall budget strategy and the national debt, who would like to pick up on that discussion?
I think that both of us can, or all three of us can, Bronwyn. Yeah.
So Matthew, let's get your comments.
Sure. I think that this is a very important budget, Bronwyn, and certainly hasn't been an easy one for us to cast. The global environment, as your viewers are well aware, I'm sure, is very difficult, but also from a domestic perspective, the revenue performance that we've seen coming out of the economy is not what we had become used to over many years. And in light of that, we have, over the last few years, been putting in place tighter spending controls, tighter spending frameworks, and this year's budget is a continuation of that process, where we now see government limiting growth in government spending. That's not
by some 10.4 billion rand over 3 years.
Correct. That's not to say that government spending doesn't grow. It does grow. Unlike many countries in the world that don't have the privilege, the opportunity to grow their allocations, we are still able to add resources to the kinds of priorities that government has set itself, but certainly not in the volume that many people would have been expecting or hoping for. And this is in some respects a new reality that we have to cope with until such time as we can put in place.
Well, that reality, Ismail, let's turn our attention to you. If we take 10.4 billion rand out of the expenditure system over the next 3 years, some are saying, well, then how are we going to be able to get the economy to grow, to create jobs? That's a real risk.
Yeah, look, I think that the big issue is how do you fund government's programs, and at a time when the difference from October last year is that we've seen revenue falling quite sharply from what we anticipated at the time. So on the one hand, certainly we need to make sure that from the tax perspective, I think that we have a more realistic outlook on what we can collect, and in the short term. But in the medium term, the bigger issue is really to step up on growth, because if you don't get growth, then obviously your debt to GDP, etc., will suffer. You won't get as much revenue. And so,
if I can interject there, some critics have said that we need a radical change in strategy to boost growth, and that steady as she goes is not going to cut it at this point. Fair criticism?
I think we do need to be perhaps radical, and that's why the minister adopted the or has really tried to give effect to the NDP to the extent that he could. And I think that firstly just sets out a vision, but within that it does set out approaches towards long-term investment, and clearly we need to boost infrastructure spending. So it's about changing those balances if you want to put in place more growth-enhancing measures. Of course, some of the measures we've taken, for example, also on private companies to be able to grow off a domestic base onto the continent and kind of hook the South African economy more towards the rest of Africa. I think those are the kinds of measures that can actually help to get South Africa to grow faster.
Infrastructure spending has been tabled as a priority. Let's go back to how we're going to fund that infrastructure spending.
We have announced about 800 billion infrastructure spending over the next 3 years,
which we keep announcing.
Yes, we keep spending that money. We just added the 1 year into the medium term. Over the last couple of years, entities like Eskom, Transnet continue to spend their infrastructure budget.
Are we managing to spend the full quota, Tuto?
Also, I mean, the government budget makes provision for infrastructure spending, particularly that relates to social infrastructure, schools, clinics, dams, and water infrastructure. And we continue to spend that money. Over the next 3 years, we penciled about 430 billion, and that money is on budget. This will be spending by provinces and municipalities, and the other 400 billion of the 800 billion that is spending by state-owned companies. We have seen in the past years underspending. We continue to do better than the previous years, and I think that we are seeing some improvements. And the important thing is that the money is on budget, and all the agencies of government, both within government and within the state-owned or within the state-owned companies, they should be able to spend their budget.
Matthew, when it comes to the expenditure cuts, have you targeted non-performing departments? Have they been the first to come under the firing line?
Well, not so much the departments as the programs. So programs where departments are struggling to put in place the kinds of processes and capacity that allow them to spend the money and spend the money against the trajectory that it was budgeted. Where departments are struggling to do that, that is where we have targeted our cuts. There are a number of reprioritizations that have been made, all told about 50 billion in total. And similar process has been followed there, where departments have been asked to focus on areas that are either relatively not as important a priority, or where they are struggling to find the spending performance required, reprioritize that money towards their priorities, or where the capacity to spend is in place.
Ismail, was it a difficult decision not to raise taxes this time around? Did it warrant much debate? Let's get the inside track.
No, look, I think that we actually believe that tax policy should be boring. You don't want to surprise the market needlessly. I think taxation is about a contract that you are going to spend the money on things that people out there expect you to spend efficiently and so on. So it actually wasn't as much on the agenda as I think many of the analysts thought. And for that reason, I think we don't have an ad hoc approach to taxation. When we are going to take any major steps, we do want to kind of prepare the ground. I think the ministers outlined some of the risks that we see, but for that reason he announced a tax review committee that will actually go into some of the tax issues.
Well, after the break, we're going to talk about that tax review committee. And thanks so much for your time, Ismail. You are going to be leaving us now. I appreciate you joining us. Stay with us. We'll be back after the short break with more post-budget analysis right here from Parliament.